Hi, everybody, and welcome to this week's Writers Chat. And this is the place we really like to gather together as writers, and we talk about all things about writing, for writers, and by writers. So we're really glad to see you here, either live or, well, we hope you're not dead, but you're live here in the chat. We've got the giggles today, you guys. This is going to be a wild show. But anyway, either live or if you're watching the replay, you might want to take a sip of wine before you watch the rest of it. It keeps going downhill the way it is. What fun we're having today. But anyway, we've got all three of our regular co-hosts today. We got Johnny Alexander and Beth Cat, and my name's Jean Wise, and we got all three of us here today, so you never know what's going to happen. And we are joined today by one of our favorites and one of our own, Cherrilynn. Yay!
Hi. Oh, you just warms my heart. The three blonde bombshells.
Oh. And the redhead, right? That would be the name of a book, Three Blondes and a Redhead. There you go. On that way. Well, if I remember right, we're doing something about listening today. Is that right, Cherrilynn? And then why don't you give us an intro and what you want to talk about today?
Yes, we're going to talk about listening. We're going to discuss the definition of listening, why listening is important, and tools for active listening, and how writers can put these tools into action. Now, please don't shut us down because you think you know how to listen or you know the definition. I was a communications major, and I thought I knew how to listen until someone very close to me said, Cherrilynn, you just don't know how to listen. You cut people off. You interrupt their sentences. I almost lost $60,000 of my bosses because I didn't listen properly. And I did lose that job. So there's ways we can listen. And this discussion is going to be twofold. It's going to be about listening and active listening, and then it's going to be how the writer can implement that as far as writing.
Good.
You know, writers, we write, so sometimes it's hard for us to listen, but listening is a good tool. Do you want me to just get into it?
Why don't you just go ahead and get into it?
Let's get it. You guys we listening?
This is important info, so go for it. We're looking forward to this.
Most of this is kind of dry, but the definition of listening, Webster's definition anyway, is to give close attention with the purpose of hearing, to give ear, to hearken, to attend. I love the Bible Old Testament definition. It's Shema is the original word, to hear intelligently with implication of attention and obedience.
Can you repeat that one more time? Repeat
Yes.
that. Hear that.
To hear intelligently with implication of attention and obedience.
Wow.
You know, our number one commitment
implies more than just hearing, doesn't it? It really implies more than hearing.
Yes, and our number one commandment as people who follow God is, in many of the religions, is hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one. Hear, that word hear is Shema, listen. So listen with the intent of obedience. So that's our Bible lesson for today. But in the New Testament, it's pretty much the same, to hear intelligently and to understand what is said. You know, why is listening important? It improves mutual understanding in all relationships. Think of relationships that are difficult. I know sometimes my husband and I have different personalities. He says something and I don't quite understand what he's getting at. I have to ask him. Anybody been there? Am I the only one who has difficult conversations where people aren't hearing you correctly?
Yeah. Well, I think some of the most misunderstandings come because one person didn't hear the other or assumed something about the conversation.
And we're going to get into that. That Jean, your last name is perfect. That was a wise answer.
Oh.
And research shows that we only remember 25 to 50% of what we hear. So what we're discussing today, if we were to ask you after this, what did Cherrilynn say? You'll only remember 25 to 50% of it. And when we speak to friends, colleagues, our bosses, our customers, I know Bethany's job, what her and Michelle do, they have to listen because they have to get every detail correct. And most of us, after 10 minutes of speaking, they only understand half of our conversation. Right, Bethany? Have you ever had a situation where you work with somebody and they just didn't understand what you were trying, the point you were trying to get across?
We repeat ourselves a lot.
Yes. You don't have to give names.
Thanks, someone's got feedback, but I think too, part of listening is asking a lot of questions, and you might get to that because a lot of times you have to make sure, sometimes you don't even know what the person's saying because they might not even know what they're saying.
That's so true. That's so true. I know a lot of times when I'm talking, especially when I'm tired, I'm like, did I just say that or what did I just say? But anyway, yes, I mean, we need to really listen. And what it's called actually is active listening. Some people call it reflective listening. But another reason why listening is important is because, as I stated before, businesses lose money for lack of listening, and relationships are strained. Did you guys know that many Fortune 500 companies spend thousands of dollars to teach their employees how to actively listen? Hospitals do it, and doctors' offices do the same. Those are important. I mean, you think about it, if you're a doctor and you don't, and your employees and your nurses don't actually listen to the patients, that could be a lawsuit. So we discussed the definition, why listening is important. I mean, can anybody think of other reasons why listening would be important? I mean, even to our kids. Mom, the house is on fire. Yeah.
Boys, it's silence is sometimes the loudest noise in my house. So like if there's a certain level of noise going, I know everything's okay. But when things get quiet, that's when like the radar goes off.
Yes.
Actually, business, I was just talking to my husband today, and he was talking about a situation where they have he's in the military, and they work with, they call them clients or contractors.
Yes.
And sometimes he will go overseas to do a job, and when he gets there, the job is not what he thought because nobody asked the right questions. So like that's why I would come back to the word question. You know, they didn't listen enough, and so then he gets out there and asks the right questions and listens a little bit, and then all of a sudden the job is different than what they expected. And that's resources, time, it's inefficient, just like with what you were saying.
Yes, and that's a great example. And we're going to get into the tools of active listening. Some people, many people, John Maxwell, a lot of the leaders, if you go to their websites and stuff and you type in active listening, there's tons of stuff out there. I'm giving you the basics of what I learned. And I actually did a speech on this with the military because I almost lost my friend. I lost money. People were telling me, Cherrilynn, you're not a good listener. I want to be a good listener. As a wife, as a sister in Christ, as a sister to my two siblings, as a daughter, and as someone who people come to counsel for, I want to be a good listener. And so we're going to discuss some of the things for active listening. And the word active implies that it takes effort. It takes effort to be a good listener. I remember our first tip is make the person feel like they're the only one in the room. Now, these are one-on-one conversations that I'm talking about right now. Have you ever been, I'm going to say at church, have you ever been at church or maybe at a function, a writer's conference or another function where you're talking to somebody and you're pouring out your heart and they're looking around the room? Has that ever happened to you? That's happened to me, and I felt like this big. I felt like I didn't matter. I felt like the person just wanted to find somebody better to talk to, and I was boring. That I'm sure that has happened to some of you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I've done it to people. I've caught myself doing it to people, and it breaks my heart when I do it to people, and I stop and I was like, I'm sorry, I wasn't paying attention. Please forgive me. But make that person feel like they're the only one in the room. What you can do is, somebody have a question? Bethany?
Oh, no, I was going to add. But I don't want to interrupt you as we're talking about.
No, go. I love your input, Bethany.
Mary Kay Ash, who founded Mary Kay, she is still renowned for making people feel like they were the only person in line. I've just heard story after story of women saying, you know, they would stand in a line for an hour or more to talk to her, but when you got there, it didn't matter that the line was long. She gave you her full attention. And so, like, I want to be that. That's the kind of person I want to be. Like, that I get known for that. Like, that's such a. I want people to feel like that. Not that I'm ready to get out, even if I have to get out. You know, that they're important, and so they feel that.
I got an example too. A boss I had, his wife, beautiful, gracious woman. Excuse me. Every time I start to talk, my throat like this. Her name is Brenda, and she would talk about wherever she goes, people would just tell her their life stories, or her sister would say that, you know, wherever we go, everyone just tells Brenda their life stories and all. But if you ever talk to Brenda, she was just like Bethany said. No matter what you were telling her, you could be telling her the most inane thing, but her focus was completely on you. That eye contact was right there, and you felt like what you were saying was important. So it's no wonder complete strangers would tell her everything that, you know, their life stories, because she was so good at that and just so sweet and kind and just made you feel like you were important in those few minutes, and she was interested in what you had to say. I think it's a gift. I mean, I think we can kind of learn it and train ourselves, but I also think some people just have that natural gift and ability to.
And patience, because there's some patience.
Yes.
And humility, because I mean, you probably have to go. Like, for people who are in that, like with Mary Kay, and then someone said umbrella makers, and then this lady too, speaker. Like, there's other things that they have to get to, but still to be able to put that to the back burner.
Mm-hmm.
And make that person feel important is such a big deal.
I think so often we get distracted by either the past, we're thinking about what something happened, or it's the future, what we're going to say next, or who is that came in the room, and then you get so distracted. And in this age of distraction, I think it makes it even harder to be a good listener now than it was probably even 5-10 years ago.
And as writers, the way we can implement this too is when we have a book signing. Hi, Rachel. When we have a book signing, we have people standing in line. Hopefully we have more than one person standing in line, but you want to give that person your all in all and your attention. But you also don't want to, you know, leave the other people standing there for hours. I was at a writers conference a couple of weeks ago, and this question was asked to us on the panel: what do I do when I'm standing in line, when people are standing in line and I've got to get going, or I have other people? And I thought to myself, I said, what would I want to hear?
Yeah.
And the other writers didn't really know, but I was thinking, what would I want to hear? And I said, what you can tell them is, your conversation is so important to me. I wish I had the time to have a cup of coffee and sit with you and talk, but unfortunately, I don't. But thank you so much for your support. You know, your support and who you are means so much to me. So we have one more minute to talk.
So you're expressing value for that person.
Yes.
That's kind of what you are.
That's kind of a way you can, and even if you're in there's separate, you know, one-on-one conversations, and then there's the other conversations. But there's ways to end the conversation without saying, okay, I gotta go, and make the person feel like, what am I, chopped liver? Bethany, I know you've done a lot of studying and communications and stuff. Do you have anything to add to that? I mean,
Well, I've been watching a chat, and I think a lot of people are really resonating with this topic. Like, I mean, I think you're hitting the nail on the head, quite honestly.
Oh, wonderful. And if anybody has something to say, please, or wants to share a story. But so for tools for active listening, make the person feel like they're the only one in the room. And that means you eye contact. I mean, don't bug out like that, but lean in a little bit. If you're sitting down, lean in a little bit, and allow the person for some personal space. When we lean in, it helps with the distractions around us too. And it shows that we are intentional about really listening to that person. Use vocal agreements. See, Bethany's already doing it. She's shaking her head. Like she's shaking her head. And sometimes, and Johnny and Jean will go, yep. Those are signs of good listeners. You're not just saying it to pretend you're a good listener, you're really listening. So vocal agreements are very important. So let's just recap a little bit. Make the person feel like they're the only one in the room. Lean in and use vocal agreements. And a big one for me, keep from judgment. A person may have a lisp, being a known sin, or doing something we don't know, or just rubs us the wrong way. Put all that aside and listen. We may learn something about that person that might help us help them and minister to them. I know I've been judgmental of people before. Just to tell you a story, I was at a restaurant, and if I didn't know the waitress, she edits. She was an editor. I think it was either for Simon and Schuster or one of the big companies. I prejudge. I would think she's a waitress. She's got kids at home. She's probably divorced. She's probably trying to make ends meet. This woman is married to the owner. She has like bachelor's degrees and things like that. So never prejudge people. And if you don't like the person, really ask God for help to listen, because there's a reason that person is coming to you. So keep from judgment. And that's a hard one.
I had this experience recently. Same thing, just praying like, God, get me through this conversation, because I am not happy and I don't want to be here.
Yeah.
And that's coming through in your tone of voice, everything, and it's hard. Can we go to back to the body language, like that part of the list?
Yes. The body language is 75% of what people are actually saying. Thank you for bringing that up, Bethany.
I was gonna say, at Writers Conference is one thing, Kyle says this a lot, like if he's doing, agent Q&A or something, but how to read the interest of the person you're talking with and how to know when to switch to a different idea. And the leaning is what made me think of it. If someone leans back from the table, they're distancing, so it might be time to move on. So then knowing that, for us, even like, so I'll find myself in that same situation, distancing, and I try to push myself back forward, don't look like that. And then what I find interesting about body language is that where your knees and toes are pointed is where your interest is. And so if I find myself in a conversation where I need to go somewhere, and I will think about where my feet are, and so I'll try to shift and adjust that so I'm facing them exactly. Although sometimes if someone won't let you go,
hints that way too. It's time to end this conversation by.
But a lot of times I'll find myself, I'm at an angle to a person standing right here, and I have to think, let's shift our bodies back, so I can show them that I'm listening to them. It's things we have to be aware of. Those are cues, and some people don't read cues well, but.
Bethany, that's so brilliant, because we have to be conscious. That's why it's active listening. Active listening takes our whole body to listen. And you made some great points, because I didn't mean to laugh as you were talking, but I was thinking of speaking to someone and noticing my feet were the wrong direction and telling myself, oh, I got to point my feet forward, but I'm trying to listen at the same time. It is. It's hard. Tina said something like, if you don't have someone to listen, it can lead to burnout.
Yeah, what happened, there was a conversation a little bit earlier, and I tried to make note of it because this is something I've been thinking about too. Then Rhonda, I think it was, who wrote that she tries to listen to others, but often they don't listen to me. And it's so sometimes being an active listener seems like a one-way street, and I think it's an area of frustration sometimes that we can't get others. And I think this is sort of what Tina was responding to in her comments too. So you kind of understand where they're coming from.
And we're going to get into the questions you can ask people once you're after you listen to them. But first, I think what Tina said and what Rhonda were saying, what can we do ourselves to become active listeners? Bethany was talking about some of the body cues, but I know sometimes when someone's talking to me, I'm planning my grocery list, or I'm thinking about how to respond to their first sentence. And in my head, I've got a response and they haven't even finished talking yet, and I cut them off. Has anybody ever had that happen to them, or have they ever done that? I've done it to people. I've been cut off mid-sentence so many times. And and some of the excuses I get are, it's because I'm going to forget what I'm going to say, or we have to be so careful. And it is a learned thing. If you guys have someone to practice with, if you want to practice with me, you call, email me, we'll do a Zoom chat and we can practice. But it's something you have to practice. Bethany's got a smile on her face. I think, and you do too, Jean. I think you guys understand. You've probably been there.
Yeah. And it's not perfection. It's progress. It's practice, like you said.
Yes.
In constantly working on it. Bethany, share the quote that you shared in the chat room from Robert Benson. I thought that was really good.
I love it.
Yes, I love that quote. And what Leslie said about my husband feels unloved and unimportant if I'm not paying attention to him. My husband's the same way. He wants undivided attention when you speak to him. He wants you to look at him. And it doesn't make him wrong. It doesn't make him a baby. When you look at somebody and they know you care.
Mm-hmm. And can you share the quote, Bethany, so we have it on the recording? I think it's great.
It's from Robert Benson, who is a speaker at a lot of writers' conferences and churches, and he's the author of Dancing on the Head of a Pin.
Oh, yes.
C-E-N. Amazing book. It's one of my top 5. And the quote is, he said this in a keynote, being listened to often feels like being loved. And I just love that so much. So that I actually think about that a lot when I'm the person who doesn't want to be in the conversation anymore. I think about that. And Catherine mentioned it in the chat too. Sometimes you're there to listen because the other person needs it. It really isn't about you. And so that's, again, learning patience, humility, and all that as well. But I love that. And you know what? Words of affirmation, people, if you ever read the love languages and stuff, the eye contact is it can be part of the dialect, because that's mine. Mm-hmm. I just want my husband to look at me when I'm talking. But he doesn't care if I'm on my phone when he's talking. I mean, it doesn't bother him, but it really bothers me. So I try not to do that with him either, but I need you to just look me in the eyeballs.
Yes. Christy put something in the chat that I want to respond to, because I think I'm the same way Christy is. That she says she's a fixer, so she wants to help, and I want to have an answer ready. And often I think the other person just wants to be listened to. They don't necessarily need the fix and the answer. But I forget that because I want to fix like Christy does here. I want to give them the answer, the wisdom that they're seeking. And
how
they don't need.
I'm the same way. I'm the exact same way. So once they're talking and things like that, we're going to go over the questions you ask. Well, let's do that. And then I will address your fixer question, because I'm a fixer too. So when you're listening, you're leaning in, your eye contact, you're doing, yes. Once they're done, you ask them questions. I understood you to say, Jean, that you're a fixer, and when you're listening, you want to fix their problem. Is that right? Is that what you said? Did I understand you correctly?
Yes, and I like that you used my name, other than I know you were trying to direct the question, but that name is another connection.
Yes, thank you for bringing that up. And other ones you can say, and if they say, no, that's not what I meant, you can say, can you please restate it another way? Because I really want to understand the message you're trying to convey. Now, I've done that to people and they've said, well, if you can't hear me right the first time, and then I'm like, okay, then yes, I've had people say that. And some people would, hi, puppy. But, and that's where you could come in and say, well, I truly do. And I'm sorry if I didn't hear you properly, because there's different filters people listen through. People listen through how they were brought up. I mean, if, their attitudes about certain things in life, their values. We listen through our values. We listen through our hurt and our pain. So we may not totally be in our education level. We may not be totally understanding what somebody is saying, but most people don't do that. When I've done that before, it's thrown people off like, wow, she really is listening and she really does care. So you do that and you go back and forth. And this is something that I really recommend you ask somebody to work on with you. You talk about certain things. I have a different vocabulary than some other people do. Definitions need to be defined. I did that. I shouldn't have said it that way as a writer, but we need to define our definitions if we don't understand. If somebody says something to me and I don't quite understand the definition, like if I can be a little bit bold here, I was talking to some teen girls and I had used the words, we're going to hook up your pastors, and they all got giggly and laughing, and I didn't know what that word meant. Those words meant. I seriously didn't know. I was just going to get them together and they would talk, and they told me. But imagine if in that conversation that didn't happen. So in conversations, if you don't understand a word someone is saying, like I have a friend who got her doctorate. She's got like a double doctorate. Some of the words she uses, I don't understand. So I'm like, okay, Jen, I only have an associate's. Can you define this word for me? But we can do that together. So don't be afraid to ask. And as you guys are talking about humility, be humble. Love is humble. If you want to show love to that person and listen, be humble and say, I didn't quite grasp what you were saying. This is what I got. Is that what you meant? Oh, I have Rhonda says some people just want you to fix their problems so they don't have to. Yeah. Well, let me tell you about this. When somebody calls me or I talk to somebody at church, I get a lot of people who want me to counsel them. But what I say is, after I say, this is what I understood you to say, and then I'll say, do you want me to help you with this, or do you just need a listening ear? And that's what I do. Would you like me to help you with this? Do you want my advice, or do you want a listening ear? That's what I do. And if they want, it's discernment. Each person is different. There's people who will take advantage of you and want you to fix all their problems. But if they are truly in need of help, why not be there for them and guide them and show them how to fix their problems?
And I like Rhonda's comment at the end of that one statement that she started to read. So often she'll affirm what she understands the problem is and says, so what is your plan of action? Kind of get them involved. I think that'll often tell you if they just want to be listening to, or they already know. Sometimes they already know what the next step is, you know. They just need to vent a little bit and be listened to, and then they'll say, well, you know, to be honest, this is what I need to do next. And then you could come alongside them and say, well, if you want, I'll listen again, or, you know, you could follow up with them that way, you know. But
I think that, Rhonda, that was brilliant. So what is your plan of action? I'm going to use that too. Do you have a plan of action? Can I help you with your plan of action? Because us as fixers, I sometimes have I never stepped on God's toes. God won't let me, but you know what I mean? It's like, you could try to, but God doesn't let that happen. And we don't want to be God for them. We don't know what God's trying to teach them through that. But listening, I mean, I think of what James said, the brother of Jesus, half-brother Jesus, be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to get angry. If we're good communicators, we will be quick to listen. We will ask those questions before we make any kind of judgments, before we misunderstand what someone is saying. And then we probably won't even get angry. And if we do get angry, we'll be able to handle it a little bit better because we have all the information.
sounds good. And then there was something, oh, I like what Catherine said too. When people ask for prayers, I follow up with, and what's the outcome we are agreeing on for our prayers? So you know for sure, that's asking for clarity.
Clarity and expectations.
Yeah, and I was thinking about when you said about filters. I think that's really important. But one filter I think we forget sometimes is our role. Are we there as the listener?
Yes.
Are we there as the fixer? Are we there just for prayer so we know what our role in prayer is for them? So I think that is a great additional question that Catherine shared.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
What were you going to say, Bethany?
I didn't mean to interrupt. I think I wanted to add into what Catherine said. I think I've heard myself ask, are we praying for this or are we praying against it?
I like that, yes.
Are we praying for a no here?
Yes.
Yeah.
And to springboard off of what you said, Jean, what are our roles in this?
Mm-hmm.
You know, are you in a ministry position at church? Are you the boss? Are you talking to the boss? Are you talking to the pastor? What is your role in the whole situation when you are listening to somebody?
Mm-hmm.
So what is your role? You know, that is a good, and how you would answer. But there's so many ways that we can go on this. But we have what, about 25 minutes?
Yeah, a little bit less, closer to about 20. So what about the role of the writer? Can you kind of swing into somehow we apply this to writing? And
so what I was thinking, how can we as listeners use this as writing? And I just want to go over what we talked about real quick before we get into that. We went over the definition, why listening is important, and the tools of active listening. Make sure the person feels important, by leaning in, the vocal agreements, and keeping from judgment and asking them. And also confirming, like you guys said, expectations and things like that. But I think as a writer, we need to be healthy as we're writing. So doing this in all of our relationships is crucial. But we need to be healthy. But we also, you know, emotionally, mentally, and of course physically too, but that doesn't really have to do with listening. But the ways we can use these listening tools is in interviews. I mean, I know many of you may have, even if you're fiction or nonfiction, you may have interviewed. I know I interviewed police officers. I need to get those details correct. interviewing teachers or pastors in nonfiction. In interviews, listening is so vital. Does anybody want to?
I interviewed for over 10 years when I worked for our newspaper, and I agree with you completely. And one of the things I learned about listening closely in interviews, but it's probably in any of these relationships we talk about, is often what they talk about or what they first bring to your attention is not the issue. It's often the fifth or sixth or seventh thing they say that is the issue. And I also found in interviews especially, it's sometimes that last 2 minutes as they're standing in the doorway getting ready to leave, that's when they say the thing. So I've learned to listen the entire time, because that interview wasn't done until it's done, because sometimes you get the best treasure, the best quote right at the tail end.
Maybe we could do a how to do interviews writers chat.
Yeah.
Oh, we've got a person for that. Jameson.
Yep.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Because
I was going to add on to that about the interviews. As an interviewer and interviewee, the best interviews I have found are when either I'm listening or the person is listening, and we ask a question that we may or may not have known, was going to get answered. But that answer leads a rabbit trail, and sometimes that next portion is the best part. It's like, if not sticking to the script of the questions we had to go through, but listening to the tone of voice changes, or if you can see them, their face lights up, and got it. That's the direction. And so that's a skill too, to know how to get the story behind the story, that the readers are actually going to really care about.
And that's a great point, Bethany, because we have to read their facial and their body cues and their inflections and their voices. Listening is definitely active, and it's a skill, a learned skill. Thank you for bringing that up. Somebody said something about, oh yes, Christy said, I'm a journalist, digital voice recorder. Yes, that's a great idea. And I love how you both said, because if we're not intentionally listening and we're sticking to the script, like you said, Bethany, we may miss something. We might miss something vital. So what you said, Jean and Bethany, just let it go, let them talk, and really listen. Jameson is the producer of Godspeed Podcast. Okay. So, yes.
Huge people. He'd be great.
That would be great. So interviews, for fiction and nonfiction, because we know we need to get the facts straight, or our reputation as a writer is bad. So Edie Melson recently did a blog post on where you can go listen to different other people's conversations. Listening to conversations and like the inflection, the word usage. Coffee shops are great, malls are great, even listening amongst your friends. I want to share a kind of a personal story with you of how God made me start listening to my surroundings better, and because some of us write like mystery and I know, Bethany, you guys, congratulations on your new Platinum Faith book, but you have stories in those books. So even nonfiction people write stories, and these stories would probably have dialogue or descriptions. So my sister was rear-ended by a truck on the highway going really fast. And I was the first person she called. And I just told her, don't turn your neck, look forward. To make a long story short, she had a broken neck.
Ooh.
We're in the hospital, in the emergency room, there's 2 bays in one room, and there's really no divider. I had my back toward the man who was shot in the leg behind us, and my mother standing at my sister's head, and I'm standing at my sister's side, and my sister has the neck brace on, and she has a little fracture in her neck. and I'm praying, and I'm just praying and praying and praying for my sister. And pretty much the Holy Spirit said, stop, look around and listen. And as I did, the guy behind us coded because he was OD. Yes, he coded. And I was listening to the beep, beep, beeps. I was listening to I call it an orchestrated chaos of the doctors and nurses, and how they communicated so well that I could hear their feet shuffle, and I could hear where they were in this guy's bed behind me. My mother is actually watching them perform a trach. I wasn't going to turn around and watch that. But, and I'm listening, and all of a sudden as I'm listening, the code blue goes off in the other room, and the doctor says, nurse, just, he spoke to someone. I knew exactly who he was speaking to because I was really listening, and I couldn't see anything behind me. I had come in and I'd seen everybody where they were standing, but I wasn't concerned about that at the time. But I knew who he was talking to, and the nurse I could see her walk through and go to the other room to where the code blue was. But I would have missed all of the details of what happened. They saved the guy, they saved the girl, praying over my sister. God healed her broken neck, right then and there. That was a miracle. But all of the things, and the police that were standing there with the guy, because the policeman shot him, we spoke with them and got details from them. So this story, I learned a lot through this story about listening to my surroundings, not just what people are saying, but the noises. We all kind of know what the beach sound, well, maybe some of you know what the beach sounds like, and the mountains. But when we're writing about something so desperate that people really need to hear about, those little noises and those little, the words that are used will make the person understand that we have been there. We know what they're talking about. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. But writers, in your interviews, listen wherever you are, listen. I mean, don't stick your nose in there, but listen. Because you can hear great quotes, and movies too. Mm-hmm. When you watch movies or TV programs, they have some really great one-liners, zingers. Make it your own, change it up, but use it that way. I do that too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Dialogue.
Yes, dialogue is so important.
Yeah, some of the best ways we learn as writers to communicate authentic dialogue is by listening.
Yes,
that's almost take notes and rewrite it, because it becomes not as forced, it becomes real then.
Yes, and I think it was Diane Mills. It could have been Diane Mills, or I can't remember, Linda. I can't remember whose class I took, but they said it might have been Diane Mills. She watches movies and she writes the dialogue and what they do. So in the movies, because if we want to write visually as writers, we want the people to see what they want to visualize what we're writing. Diane, I believe it was her, said, watch movies and write what they're saying, write what you're seeing, because it will help you better your writing as you're listening to their dialogue, as you're listening to the sounds in the movies.
Can I just add a little bit to that too?
Of course.
To pay attention to facial expressions and what muscles are moving, because you can see that sometimes.
Yes.
Like the flex of this little muscle right here, and what emotion is that associated with. That can be really helpful to pay attention to when you're writing fiction, developing a character.
So these books,
yeah, I've got that book, one of those books. Yeah.
The character these emotion books and the negative traits, the source. But isn't there one about
the emotion one?
Yeah, the emotion one. I was listening as you were talking.
No, I know. There's this one. I think a lot of us have this one, but yeah, Bethany said micro expressions, just those really teeny tiny things that we pick up on without even realizing it, unless we are paying attention and start paying attention to those things.
And Melissa has a really great point. I think that's why I rely so heavily on beats. because what people do along with what they say conveys meaning so much more. A beat is like an action when the person is talking. Like the person could say something as they headed out the door, or as they sip their tea, or as they're, sipping their tea means maybe they don't, not that they don't care, but they're relaxed, or as they're pulling at their jeans. It's different. It conveys emotion. So that was good. Let's see.
Yeah.
Oh, I won't say that one. It's fine, but so we see, how can writers put tools into action with interviews, listening to other people's conversations and dialogues, things like that. Character traits. I mean, you can have a character who's a good listener or a horrible listener.
That's true. Yeah.
And make them interrupt somebody, or the character is, one character is speaking and the other character leans in. If you write that, you would know that that person that's leaning in is a good listener, and maybe somewhere down the road they hear something they're not supposed to hear, and it gets into a suspense story or a murder or whatever.
Yeah, or the opposite is true. They think they're a good listener.
Yes.
They pull back.
Yes.
And so you, or you want to portray them as a good listener, and yet you don't put in those kind of body languages that support that character. Yep.
Yes. Oh, I like Bethany's about micro expressions. If she had to go away for a second, but even micro expressions, watching people. When you watch someone who's nervous, like I remember I came up to an accident. I was the first one on the scene of an accident, and there was a body in the middle of the road, and I prayed over it. I was the first one on the scene, and and I remember when I opened my eyes, I prayed over him. I knew what I was supposed to do. I had EMT training, but I made sure he was alive, and I laid my hands on him, and I cried out, and I just prayed and asked God to save his life. And to this day, when I open my eyes, I can visualize the cars on the side of the road and the people standing, and how some were like this and some were like this and some were like, this, looking at their watch because they just didn't care. But I remember the scene, and I remember he looked like a rag doll. So these are things, and he lived. The other guy that was in the median didn't. That's a whole nother story. But I remember, I visualize these things, and I remember, and I write, and I try to write them down in case I can use them some other time.
Yeah. Bethany, I want to talk about the Lie to Me's. Somebody said it's a TV show, not in production though anymore. Can you want to explain a little bit about that?
Good. That was a great program.
Okay, so Lie to Me it's like a crime show, kind of. There's always a situation that's happening, and instead of it being a detective as the main character, it's a guy who is he's learned about studied micro expressions, so he can tell people are lying. So he gets called in to be like the expert in interrogations and things like that, and he pays attention to. It's so interesting. Like Catherine said, her son took a class and said, I've learned all that in the first 5 minutes of Lie to Me. They talk about the science behind, like, the eye twitch or the way of the jaw ticks, and there are things that we don't control. Like, you can't control the micro expression. It is just learned, or they talk about all that kind of stuff. So it's very fast. It's I thought it was a fascinating show.
I loved it.
Rhonda says it's available on Netflix. So
that's going to be my next one. Go back.
Yeah. Well, it's a tool to put in our writer's toolbox, to learn a little bit more of these, and we can add that both to fiction and nonfiction, like what we've said.
One of the genius things they did in Lie to Me was when he would explain like the micro expressions, and then they would show just real quick on the screen the photos of like famous people making that expression.
Yes. Like Nixon. And like this, that's grief. That's and there's another one, bull, which I don't even know.
That's really good. Bull is really good.
And he said, it was one of those shows, and they were talking about when people act surprised, and they're like, you're only surprised for just a second, and then another emotion takes its place. So for someone who is surprised for 30 seconds or more, that's a tell of a lie, because anger or sadness, something else should have replaced that emotion pretty quickly. And one of those episodes they were talking about, he threw a book at somebody. And then just to watch that surprise.
You need to find that and watch that.
They're both very, very good. I like watching those shows because I learn, like what Bethany is saying, I learn, actors study this stuff. So I learn how, I watch the facial expressions and and listen to the verbiage. Rachel was talking about, when we were talking about interviews and going further and not cutting the person off, Rachel was saying that Jerry Jenkins says, don't be afraid of the silence. When you're interviewing someone, don't be afraid of the silence.
I think silence is a great technique in interviews and in active listening, like you said, to have that. So as we listen, as we go into silence. Hey, it's 5 of, so I don't know if we want to invite people back on for any final comments. Do you, as people come on back on, and as we say all the time, if you can't come on back on or can't unmute yourself, write it in the chat, because
let us know.
Off, sometimes you're still in writer's chat jail. And Cherrilynn, do you have anything you want to kind of say in kind of as conclusion as people are coming back on?
I'm still learning all this. I catch myself not listening, not being an active listener. But I think most of us here are believers in Christ. And even if you're not and you're a writer, listening to someone is so very important. It's good for your writing, but it's good, as Bethany and others were saying, to make people feel like they're loved. Don't our fans want to feel loved? And if we meet them in public, we have to let them know that, thank you, I appreciate you. Without you, I wouldn't be this writer. I mean, you would probably still write, but you appreciate them. And I encourage everybody to practice with somebody. If you want to practice, I'll practice with you. Just email me, editor@thewriteproposal. I'll just put it in there, and I'll practice with you.
Yeah, that's great. And I like the conversation in the chat about emojis.
Yeah.
That's great on that. Emojis make you think about what we're feeling. I think so, and what a way to kind of identify and nail what we're going through on that way, Melissa, I like what you just said. Sometimes it helps us be more sensitive to what's going on there, and on that way. Yeah, and that clarifies communication, doesn't it? On that way and stuff. Okay, any last minute questions or summary? Anybody want to jump in and say something?
I will just say that I think so often emails don't convey a tone. You kind of adopt a tone in an email. You have to be really, really careful with an email. When you're listening, quote unquote, through an email, you really don't hear everything.
Text messaging too.
Yes.
Yeah.
That Dory, that is so true, because like we say, we read through the filters. We process through filters, and if I've had a rocky relationship with somebody and they send me an email, I automatically get on guard, and I shouldn't do that, but I do. Or if somebody has been I have somebody in my life who's been yelled at all their life. So I sent them, and I thought it was kind and loving email. They took it wrong. So I never email them anymore. I talk to them in person so they can hear and genuinely how I'm feeling, especially when you get feedback. Like, some people give feedback. A lot of people give feedback. I think all of us have been asked to give a critique, or our job is to, if we're editing or something, if you write this, if you just edit and you do the corrections and stuff, somebody could take that wrong. So you always clarify, this is in love. It's not a personal attack. This is to help you, get better tools and write better. But Go, Rhonda.
I was also going to say, I was a social work major in college. Nobody told me to major in journalism or literature. But anyway, we studied a book called Parent Effectiveness Training.
Yeah.
And it has a whole section in it on active listening, roadblocks to communication, and so forth. It's an old book. Any public library would have a copy. I highly recommend it. Even if you don't have children at home anymore, you can learn a lot about listening by reading Parent Effectiveness Training. And I taught it to couples in marriage counseling because it was so good, the section on listening.
I think it's because it gives you a lot of good responses too, like where
I'll
you
put that title in the into the chat.
PET a lot of time pet. I remember on that way.
I was thinking there's probably somebody in our lives who doesn't listen well. And maybe somebody's thinking, well, how can I tell them how to actively listen without telling them, without sounding bossy? You can say, this is what I've learned about me as a listener, and make it about you, and say, I know I've interrupted you, speaking to the person. I know I've interrupted you. I've done this. Will you help me become a better listener? Can we practice these tools back and forth? So you're making it about you, but that person is actually getting the information.
That sounds great. Well, it is the top of the hour, so Cherrilynn, thank you. This has been very interesting discussion, and like I said, adds another tool, or reminds us of this tool that we've got in our toolbox to use as writers and stuff like that. And thank you, Rhonda, for sharing about the Parent Effectiveness Training link there and that way. Real quick, and see if I'm right on this, Melissa. Is next week Tracy Crump? Tracy Crump will be with us to share updates about writing for Chicken Soup for the Soul, which is a really good thing, and she is very good on that. If I remember right, Johnny and I are not here next week, correct, Johnny?
Right. Yeah.
Correct. And I'll be in the Caribbean someplace, hopefully with no hurricane, on a cruise ship, getting fat. So anyway.
Can I say something really quick? Tell all your friends to watch Tracy, because after I watched Tracy, I followed her advice verbatim, and I got in Chicken Soup for the Soul. My first time.
Me too.
Very good.
Rhonda too. See.
Now that's great. Feedback and just goes to show Tracy's wonderful. She's got, I think, over 20, maybe close to 25 different stories in Chicken Soup for the Soul, and that is a very, very competitive market. So to hear that you guys took her class and then got in, I mean, that it really does say something about what she's offering. Yeah, that's great.
I agree. Well, thank you for being with us today, everybody. And again, thank you, Cherrilynn, for giving us such an interesting and a good review of something that we all should practice in all our relationships, but especially as writers. So thank you, everybody. We'll see you next week. And stay, if you're here, stay for the after party. Bye now.
Bye.
Bye.